The earth shuddered under the relentless pounding of alien warships. Cities crumbled like sandcastles. The screams of the dying, a mournful chorus carried on smoke-choked winds. Humanity, so certain of its place at the pinnacle of creation, was learning a brutal lesson in humility. Caleb hated the shelters. They were dark, crowded mazes that smelled of sweat and fear. He preferred the ruins, the strange beauty of broken towers reaching for a sky painted with alien contrails. His mother scolded him, called him reckless, but Caleb was only 6, and boundless curiosity outweighed any fleeting sense of danger. On this gray, ash-filled morning, Caleb's wanderings took him further than usual, past the shattered remnants of his school and towards the sprawling refugee camp's distant edge. Soldiers, their faces grim beneath dusty helmets, paid him little mind. A child lost in his own world was the least of their concerns. He wasn't sure what drew him further. A scrap of bright cloth fluttering from a toppled statue, a bird bravely chirping on a scorched branch. With each step, the clamor of the human camp faded, replaced by an eerie silence. It was this silence, stark and unsettling, that finally stirred a flicker of unease within him. Still, there was no turning back now. The world beyond the camp was too full of strange, undiscovered things. The silence wasn't natural, not the comfortable quiet of forests or meadows. This thrummed with an undercurrent of tension, the air itself buzzing with a disharmonious hum. His footsteps felt too loud, his breathing a harsh intrusion. A ripple of movement snagged his eye, a flash of silver slipping between two hulking, vaguely triangular structures. Not human tech, that much he knew from whispered conversations around flickering campfires. Each step now measured, Caleb edged closer, the thrill of discovery outweighing the prickling unease. That's when he saw them. Not the bug-eyed monsters from his nightmares, but different. Tall, their silver skin suits rippled and shifted like liquid metal, reflecting the warped daylight. Helmets sleek and obsidian black hid their faces, making their movements even more unsettling. Armed, yes, but not with the spitting beams of plasma he knew, but with silvery cylinders that pulsed with an ominous light. Their gazes swept across the landscape, methodical and chillingly precise. Had they seen him? His heart, moments ago filled with the thrill of playing explorer, now drummed out a desperate tattoo against his ribs. Run, his instinct screamed. Run! But his legs wouldn't obey, locked in a place by a fascination as dangerous as the aliens themselves. One alien split from the group, its movements possessing an eerie, fluid grace. Its path took it directly towards a structure larger than the others, a smooth dome shimmering in the light. Caleb's curiosity burned brighter than fear. He had to see inside. With a newfound, if reckless, determination, Caleb darted forward, weaving between hunched alien guards with the desperate agility of a cornered animal. He pressed himself to the cool metal of the dome, heart pounding against the alien surface as he searched for a way inside. A seam, barely visible, ran around its circumference. A hatch? If only he could reach it. Scrambling for purchase on the sleek surface, he found a slight indentation and hauled himself up with surprising strength. His fingers latched onto the rim of the seam. With a grunt and a final surge of energy, he managed to heave himself high enough. The hatch slid open with a hiss, and he tumbled, sprawling headlong into the inky darkness of the dome's interior. The alien craft was far more spacious than he had imagined, glowing panels and screens casting an eerie luminescence across the curved surface. His breath caught in his throat, a strange, heady mix of fear and awe overwhelming him. He scrambled to his feet, then froze. In the center of the chamber, mounted on a sleek pedestal, rested an object that made his blood run cold. It resembled a child's toy, a crudely fashioned model sun surrounded by a ring of obsidian spheres. Absurd, impossible, yet his mind drew a frantic connection to his mother's frantic whispers, stories of ancients, a weapon so terrible it had seared its memory upon the collective consciousness of their conquerors. The child in him wanted to reach out, to touch the strange, pulsating spheres, yet the weight of his mother's terrified stories held him back. Instead, he crept closer, eyes tracing the fine lines connecting the model to the consoles that glimmered with unfamiliar script. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but the child's instinct for play asserted itself. A discarded stylus lay upon one panel. Caleb, with the unthinking boldness of the very young, picked it up. The panel flared to life beneath his touch, unknown symbols writhing and reforming in response. A giggle bubbled up in his throat, a flash of bright sound against the sterile hum of alien technology. Outside the dome, a patrol paused mid-stride, several heads snapping towards the unexpected noise. One alien detached from the group, its movements now sharp, predatory. As the creature approached the dome, Caleb's playful tapping against the panel increased, the screen ablaze with shifting, chaotic patterns. A discordant wail echoed from within the dome, a shrill note that shattered the oppressive silence hanging over the camp. The alien outside recoiled, its liquid armor rippling in an echo of agitation. It raised its weapon, the tip gleaming with cold light, and gestured for its comrades to fall back. Caleb, oblivious to the danger, simply kept playing. His fingers danced across the panel, drawing squiggles and spirals that sent cascades of colors across the screen. With each scribble, the terrified wail rose in pitch, the very air within the dome vibrating with discord. Panic bloomed within the alien patrol. It was more than a sound. The flickering lights seemed to cut into them, each pulse a blow against some deep, primal memory. The alien closest to the dome stumbled, its movements devolving into a frantic scramble as it desperately retreated, seeking to put distance between itself and the source of the cacophony. Within the dome, Caleb was in his own world. The colors and dancing lines were mesmerizing, and the noise, though grating, had become a fascinating challenge. Louder, he willed himself, his fingers pressing harder, drawing faster. The wail spiraled upwards, an unbearable shriek that set his teeth on edge. Outside, organized retreat had devolved into chaos. The aliens abandoned their posts, discarding weapons as they turned and fled. Their precise, disciplined movements were replaced by wild, undirected scrambles. Instinct overriding reasons, they ran blindly from the unseen horror. It didn't take long for human eyes to mark the sudden retreat. First hesitantly, then with a swell of desperate hope. Weary soldiers emerged from bunkers and ruined buildings. They watched in stunned disbelief as the metallic tide, unstoppable for weeks, broke upon the base of the gleaming dome. Caleb, weary yet exhilarated from his strange game, finally ceased his frantic scribbling. The wailing abruptly cut off, replaced by a low, ominous thrum. He blinked, momentarily disoriented by the sudden silence. His fingers still tightly gripped the stylus, and the panel before him glowed malevolently. A shiver of unease ran down his spine, suddenly dampening the thrill of victory. Had he done something wrong? Or was this how you won a war? Word of the child and the dome spread like wildfire through the human encampment. Scientists and soldiers, fueled by equal measures of fear and desperation, cautiously converged on the alien structure. Caleb, the unwitting hero, was bundled away, his head still swimming from the onslaught of noise and light. A team, their movements hesitant and laced with awe, finally breached the interior. The dome pulsed with a faint light, the air still crackling with an echo of the earlier cacophony. The object in the center was unmistakable. Disconnected now and seemingly dormant, the crudely modeled sun and its ring of black spheres seemed impossibly innocuous, a child's toy out of place and out of time. Yet the scientists knew better. Ancient texts, fragmented and barely understood, spoke of a time when those conquerors had wielded a weapon unlike any other, a doomsday device capable of shattering not worlds, but minds. A song of madness, according to the legends anyway, designed to break the enemy's psyche from within. Had they triggered it? Had the child, with his innocent play, inadvertently saved them all? The implications were both staggering and terrifying. Back in the refugee camp, Caleb was restless. Sleep was fitful, disturbed by flashes of dancing colors and echoes of the bone-deep wail that sent shivers down his spine. His mother watched him with concern, the joy of their miraculous survival dulled by the unnerving feeling that her playful little boy was somehow forever changed. In the weeks that followed, teams of scientists descended upon the dome with a mix of reverence and dread. The child's toy was dissected, each system painstakingly analyzed, every inch scrutinized for clues to its true nature. They deciphered alien script, traced complex networks of power, not power of energy, but power over the mind itself. Caleb became their unwilling test subject. He was watched, poked, and prodded. They showed him pictures of the sun-like device, played him recordings of the whale, but nothing triggered the same reaction as that first frantic play session within the dome. It was as though some invisible switch had been flipped, the alien terror unleashed, but now impossible to replicate at will. Frustration mounted with each failed experiment. Humanity had seen a glimpse of a weapon so terrifying, it had turned back history's most ruthless conquerors. It was a weapon that could end the war, a deterrent that might even prevent their enemies from returning. But it remained tantalizingly out of reach, forever locked in the actions of a child. Caleb, meanwhile, retreated further into himself. His playful smile was replaced by a lingering wariness. He hated nights when his dreams filled with the dome's cold, sterile light and echoes of a terrible, maddening song. His drawings, once bright depictions of stick figures and suns, now twisted into dark, jagged shapes and those ever-present black spheres. His mother worried as he ate less and played less, and those worries ran far deeper than the concerns of a parent in wartime. The war dragged on. Human resistance hardened, buoyed by the inexplicable retreat, but now lacking a decisive edge. Guerrilla attacks and supply line sabotage were a constant thorn in the aliens' side, but true victory seemed as distant as ever. Each day, humanity looked to the dome, hoping in their desperation that another miracle would reveal itself. Caleb's role shifted. He was no longer a test subject. He became a curiosity, a whisper of hope. They brought him to the dome regularly, leading him through the now familiar interior. With each visit, the scientist's desperation grew, the questions becoming more insistent. Could he remember exactly what he'd done? Could he try to draw it, sing the sounds, anything that could trigger the weapon again? He wanted to please them, desperately, but the memory of that day was warped and fragmented, colored by the same unnatural hues as his nightmares. The dome, once a place of wonder, now felt stifling, wrong. The stares of the scientist, once filled with curiosity, were now tinged with an urgency that bordered on hunger. Fear began to creep back into him. Fear not of the aliens, but of his own species, of the things they might do if they believed he held the key to destroying their enemies. He began to resist the visits, his small frame stubbornly unyielding as his mother pleaded with him, caught between her worry for his well-being and the hope he represented. Rumors of the child and his terrifying gift began to seep into the alien camp. Intelligence reports, intercepted transmissions, they hinted at increasing fear among the enemy. It appeared the retreat had sown the seeds of a different kind of defeat, a fracturing of morale that even their iron discipline couldn't suppress. As desperation set in on both sides, a splinter group within the human leadership began to advocate for drastic measures. Caleb wasn't just a key to victory. He represented a potential deterrent too powerful to ignore. A weapon that didn't destroy cities, but minds. That was, they argued, the only way to guarantee true security, to truly break their enemy's will to fight. They proposed conditioning, manipulation, recreating the dome's sensory assault, even if it meant breaking the boy in the process. His mother recoiled in horror, but her voice was just one lost in the growing chorus of those who saw him as a savior, not a child. News of the internal conflict leaked through the cracks of the fractured human forces. It reached the boy in whispers of hushed conversations and worried looks between soldiers he once thought were his heroes. That night, he didn't dream of the dome. He dreamed instead of cold, calculating eyes and the way the stylus felt like a burning weight in his tightly clenched fist. When the morning came, Caleb was gone. His disappearance was a small ripple of chaos in a sea of war. But to his mother, it was the end of her world. She refused to believe he was simply dead, that he'd been lost to the dangers outside the camp. No, a mother knows. He was running from the humans who'd become more monstrous than the alien invaders they fought. And in the heart of the sprawling alien camp, fear began to bloom anew. Rumors swirled of a small figure slipping past patrols, a child's shadow with a maddening song upon his lips. Caleb could never truly outrun his pursuers, not the human ones, but the alien invaders offered an unlikely sanctuary. He stumbled into one of their outposts, a skeletal thing of metal and wire on the ravaged edge of a former forest. They found him, not curled up in fear, but hunched over the dusty earth, drawing crude circles and suns. The child who terrified them looked so small, his voice a thin, frightened squeak as he held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. They approached cautiously, their usual aggression replaced by a hesitant, mirrored fear. Word of the Shadow Child, the Songbringer, had spread like wildfire. Even disciplined soldiers weren't immune to their deeply buried ancestral terror. Here was the weapon incarnate, tiny and vulnerable-looking, and infinitely more dangerous than any human army. For Caleb, survival was now instinctual. The aliens couldn't read his drawings. His whispered pleas to be taken home remained untranslated, but food and the barest necessities were provided. His jailers were as terrified as he was, making his confinement oddly gentle in its own way. Back at the main human base, his disappearance set off a new wave of conflict. Those advocating for his manipulation blamed his loss on those who'd shown the child kindness, on those who'd refused to see him as a tool. Others blamed the child himself, painting him as an unwitting defector who had handed their most powerful weapon to the enemy on a silver platter. His mother clung to the desperate hope that he was alive, her frantic searches a solitary act of defiance against the tide of war that sought to swallow yet another victim. Meanwhile, a strange stalemate had emerged. The aliens, once relentless in their advance, became static, their focus shifting inwards towards their unexpected ward. The child, who had once stumbled among them by accident, was now the centerpiece of their strategy, a creature both revered and feared. And as their scientists pored over his drawings and incoherent ramblings, the war ground to an uneasy halt. Years bled into a strange sort of limbo. Caleb grew older within the confines of his alien prison, no longer the terrified boy they'd first encountered. He was taught their language, a slow and halting process filled with misunderstandings. His drawings, once fearful scribbles, began to take on a disturbing clarity. Sometimes he sang, his voice echoing in the cold chambers. The song's nonsensical fragments dredged up from a child's half-forgotten memory. The aliens had always been masters of technology, but the mind was alien territory. Their attempts to decipher the boy's drawings and songs yielded frustratingly little. Still, a pattern emerged. His art and ramblings always echoed the structure of their ancient doomsday weapon. It was as if some dormant echo of that terrible device lived within him. A specter, haunting two species across generations. On Earth, the war had ground down to a series of skirmishes, neither side gaining any true advantage. The dome still stood, ringed with human guards, but ultimately useless. It was a monument to a fading hope, a reminder of the weapon they couldn't fully control. In time, Caleb's mother became a whisper as well, a figure of myth more than reality. She was remembered, if at all, as the mother of the lost savior, a woman lost to grief in the relentless churn of war. Yet even as battlefields grew silent, neither side was truly at peace. For the humans, a terrible question lingered. Was the victory mere luck, a momentary lapse in alien aggression? Or was there something more at play? The threat held at bay by the presence of a boy now on the cusp of manhood? Spies and coded messages filled the new silence, a different kind of war fought with whispers and shadows. Meanwhile, the aliens faced their own turmoil. The presence of Caleb was a constant reminder of their vulnerability, a crack in their carefully cultivated facade of invincibility. Dissent, once non-existent, began to bubble beneath the surface. Did they truly need to conquer this world if it held the key to their own destruction? Each day the boy's existence sowed doubt, an insidious poison more dangerous than any human weapon. And so, the strange stalemate persisted, an entire star system held hostage by a child's nightmare. The tipping point came not through force, but through diplomacy. A quiet faction of alien scientists, historians, and philosophers, long frustrated with the stagnant war, saw an opportunity. Caleb, they reasoned, was not simply a weapon, but a bridge. His very existence proved that the lines between species were not as rigid as they once believed. His mind held both the fragments of their doomsday weapon and a child's capacity for play, for simple joy. Could that not be nurtured, expanded? The proposal was radical, verging on treasonous. They would reach out to the humans, not with threats or demands, but with an olive branch as fragile and precious as the half-remembered songs of the boy. There would be no promises of retreat, no guarantees of future peace, only the chance to understand the source of their shared terror. The human response was, unsurprisingly, divided. Some saw a trick, a ploy to weaken their defenses. Others clung to the belief that Caleb was the only weapon that could truly subdue their enemy. But amidst the arguments, a weary echo emerged, a counterpoint from those who had witnessed the hardening of their own species. What sort of victory could they claim by becoming a reflection of the cruelty they fought against? In the end, it was Caleb's mother who broke the stalemate. No longer young and vibrant, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes etched with pain, she spoke with the quiet authority of one who had lost everything worth fighting for. She would go, she said. She would meet the enemy and the child who had become more legend than her own son. A small human delegation, under a flag of truce, traveled to the heart of alien territory. There, in a chamber far grander than the first dome he'd stumbled into, waited Caleb. No longer a small boy, he wore alien clothes, spoke their language, but the haunted echo in his eyes was painfully similar. His mother did not weep or cry out, merely walked towards him, the years of separation collapsing in a few tentative steps. The negotiations were tense, laced with suspicion and the weight of history, yet at the center of it all was a strange, poignant sort of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, the key to peace lay not in weapons, but in understanding the echo of a terrified child's play that had somehow reshaped the fate of two worlds. The peace would not be won in a single sweeping gesture. Treaties were drafted, faltered, and were rewritten. Historians from both sides labored to piece together the fragments of the past, searching for the true origins of the ancient weapon, hoping to understand why its echo haunted the species so profoundly. Caleb was a constant, unsettling presence in these proceedings. He wanted no grand role, desiring only to fade into some semblance of ordinariness. Neither a hero nor a villain, he was simply a young man marked by a history beyond his comprehension. He found his own path, tentatively exploring the human settlements, his alien tutors trailing behind, ready to translate or mediate if suspicion flared. His return home was not as joyous as he had imagined as a child. His old friends were gone, scattered by the war or changed beyond recognition. The ruins he'd once played in held too many ghosts. It was on the fringes of civilization, in the quiet of the rebuilding efforts, that he found a hesitant space for himself. His skill with alien languages proved useful, his understanding of their mindset invaluable as trust slowly, painfully, started to rebuild. His art took a turn as well, no longer echoes of weapons, but abstract representations of dissonance, of struggle. Some critics lauded his work as haunting and poignant, others dismissed it as the ramblings of a broken mind. He cared little for either, finding solace in the act of creation itself. He would never fully belong to one world or the other. He was, fundamentally, a creature shaped by trauma and the strange twist of fate that made a child's game more terrifying than any weapon. But he carved out a life between the stars, a bridge builder as reluctant as he was unique. As for the legacy, the aliens did eventually retreat, not defeated in battle, but with a hard-won sort of understanding. Some worlds, they learned, were not worth conquering if the price was their own sanity. Caleb's people reclaimed their shattered world, their greatest victory, a fragile peace, a commitment to never let a child's fear become a weapon again. And sometimes, under skies filled with both human and alien ships, Caleb would take a child's hand, not his own, and lead them to a quiet field far from the scars of war. There, he would teach them how to draw, how to sing with reckless abandon, to be unafraid of the joyful noise that echoed within their own boundless hearts.